And I just want to try to make a connection back to environmental issues with what we're already doing with Lean and Six Sigma efforts. And I think there's a very close connection there, but there is a little bit of a different mindset around it that I think might be some of the issues why it doesn't necessarily get covered naturally with some of our improvement efforts. There we go. So just from kind of back up a little bit, I want to give a little bit of environmental background to maybe what's been going on out in the world. And I just went through a sustainability program at the University of Iowa. It's kind of like a minor degree, the way to have it set up, but a lot of the training was kind of some of the stuff that you learned in grade school, some of the earth science stuff. How does the earth operate, basically? But some of the issues we talked about were kind of the direction that everything is going in terms of population growth, demand for food, scarcity of good access and access to clean water, changing climates and different conditions in terms of what is farmable land and usable land, energy consumption, and then CO2 emissions. So all those are kind of going in the same direction. And at some point, you know, the question is, well, how long can that continue before we run into some major issues? So a lot of people say we're already kind of hitting some points where this is starting to show up in all these different factors are starting to show up in other having negative consequences. So this is the trend, and the question is, how do we kind of slow down that trend to be able to handle and give everybody access to these options where we don't start running out of stuff, and then that's going to increase the price of things, and it can lead to some pretty bad stuff. So the purpose of this is just to give you some ideas around sustainability and how that ties into Lean, and then how there might be some opportunities in your own job area to make an impact. And I think a lot of the tools fit fairly well already with going after these types of issues. And you can have the presentation afterwards. So first we're going to define what that is, and then we're going to talk about a carbon footprint. You've heard of that or not? We're going to talk about why some companies are starting to go what we'll call green or more environmentally focused. We'll talk about some side benefits that you can get without really realizing, and that a lot of companies are starting to see as part of their efforts. Kind of mentioned before, why aren't these issues covered today with just our existing Lean programs? And then some tools that we found and how they've been tweaked a little bit to try to bring in some of these issues. And then a list of links that I found, or books that I think are pretty good that you can dig into, and if you want to learn a little bit more. So again, just trying to get you aware of some of the issues and then what is out there already today. So the term sustainability is a little confusing, and there's a lot of different definitions of that. And part of the reason this is a broad statement. So I just want to clarify what that means first, so kind of get on the same page. But one of the more common definitions is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So basically giving everybody in the future the fair opportunity that we have today. So I showed the earlier slides about access to food and energy sources and clean water, drinkable water. So if those aren't available to future generations, then it says that's not sustainable. We're not sustainable. We can't maintain that the rate we're going. So that's the idea, is that the mindset is, how can we allow people to have that same opportunity? So from a business standpoint, we have to always have to satisfy the customer demands, but we have to also manage expectations and deal with stakeholders, which is beyond just the customers themselves. That includes your community, your employees. And so making you have a more holistic decision-making process to say, this is good for our customers, however, this is bad for our community or our employees. So what's the best decision overall that benefits the most people? But not to be so focused on just cost or customer only. So it's really a balance of social and environmental considerations that get added into our current business decisions. So we make a lot of decisions based on money. So when you add in social and environment, do you still make the same decision? And then that's hopefully will keep businesses thriving for more than just a few years. It's generations and generations. So as a company, can you sustain the rate you're going for long periods of time? Not just, hey, we can make a profit today, but our business is going away in a couple years because of what we're doing right now. So that's, as a business, they cannot be sustainable if they're not having these considerations. So there's the term triple bottom line. People, profit, and planet. That's one way that they've said it, or just economic, social, and environmental. So it's this diagram here of trying to find this middle spot here where you are doing the right things for the planet, you're making money, and you're providing good opportunities for people, and you're not taking advantage of where some people are winning and others are losing. So it's a kind of a three-legged stool approach to decision making. They said that the companies that are doing that are going to be better suited to be sustainable in the long term if they're thinking about those three areas. So looking at an example, from an economic standpoint, that's how we normally would make decisions. You you're going to buy some food and you look at the shelf and say, well, that's the cheapest one, let me grab that. I can save the most amount of money. And if I don't have a whole big preference on the taste and other factors like that, I might say, well, everything else being considered equal, I'm going to go with the lowest priced item. So that's fairly clear. That's what we use today most of the time. Now the social piece would say, what's best for you from a health standpoint, and is that being considered? So looking at the ingredients in there, what are these ingredients? Are they natural products? Are they engineered type products or artificial? For a health standpoint, this is the most healthiest item I can get. How did they test the product? How did they treat the animals if it's a meat product? What are some of those issues? How do they treat the workers that produce the product? So there's some stuff like fair trade or cruelty-free. So how did the whole process work versus just what is the end product I'm looking at here? What was the process to get there and what was done there? And is it the best option from that standpoint? Am I promoting good behaviors by purchasing this, or am I promoting bad behaviors? And then from an environmental standpoint, where does it come from in terms of food miles? So how far does my food have to travel? I can't remember the number. I don't know if anyone remembers what they've seen, but it's something like your average food is like 500 miles of travel before it gets to your plate. Which seems, that's a lot of distance. Even Iowa, I think, we import like 80% of our food. And, we're supposed to be the home of food. And we bring in 80% of it from outside. So, so looking at where does this food come from the environmental perspective being the travel and the emissions and gas use and stuff like that. Or, what chemicals were used in the process, or, present there. Is it genetically modified food? Are the additives, coloring added to it? So all those things are part of that consideration. And so the triple bottom line approach would say, I'm balancing those out evenly, and then I'm trying to make a decision that is the best result for all three areas, not just economics. So there's, you obviously have the price here on the economics. Social, it's got some of these items on here. You'll have labels, you'll have a list of ingredients, nutritional value. And some areas are starting to see stuff like this how much energy was used to produce this item, whether it's in the manufacturing process or the transportation or altogether. It's a pretty extensive study to try to get some of this information, but companies that are, the idea I think for this is to try to get a point where you could look at it from an environmental perspective and make a decision that says this one's 900, the other one's 1200, so it costs, it was less energy needed to produce this particular product than another one. So I have something to compare to. But right now there's not really a good tangible way of comparing to. It's gonna have to be more about what you know and what's available on the label and your knowledge about the company itself. So there's a lot more pressure for the companies to be open about what they do, and more and more people are starting to make those decisions based on what they know about the company as well as what the product itself is. Any questions about that?
Does Europe do better at that than the United States? And is it
Yeah.
legalized? I mean, is it by law, not more by?
No, I don't know if by law. They seem to be further ahead in that. That was actually a UK thing, carbon trust thing, where they actually tried to. It's in like grams per plank. So they, yeah, they seem to be a little bit further ahead on that, and I think a few different factors around that, but they have less resources, I think, to deal with. They have less land to deal with, so there's some other drivers that we haven't experienced yet. We haven't run into overpopulation in the U.S. yet, where we don't have land to use or a place to put people, so it's more of a concern there. And then they just don't have the natural resources we have, or they've depleted most of them, so they are running into more earlier restrictions and limitations, so I think that's a driver why they're further ahead. And just from energy sources themselves, so we have plentiful amount of coal, it seems like, so. So stuff like that I think are part of the reason they're further ahead. So one way that companies can start to understand their environmental impact is through a carbon footprint. How many of you are familiar with carbon footprints? Heard of it, or did your company produce a carbon footprint report at all? No?
Is it required?
Huh?
Is it required by anybody? Footprint?
Would we know if they're doing it?
I don't know.
I'm assuming we're not because I've never heard of that.
Okay.
Well, if the news was good, we would know they were doing it.
Do you know? We do have a carbon footprint report by Rockwell.
Is it good?
I don't think there's really a good or bad. It's kind of relative. So I think the idea was you track how you're doing and then you show progress over time. So wherever you're at as a baseline, you kind of show, here's what we're doing to try to minimize that. And so really it's a way to roll up energy and primarily it's energy usage. How to roll that up into a single number that we can compare to other companies or understand the big impact. So it's a way to look at some of these greenhouse gases where, the impact of emitting these gases has kind of the greenhouse effect on the environment. Then if we can look at where are these sources coming from and try to roll them up, then we can at least have an idea of where it's coming from overall. And then try to reduce those down. So there's like 6 different greenhouse gases, at least the top 6 popular ones that are out there. And what they do is they came up with a way to normalize them so that they could reflect their impact on this greenhouse gas effect. So there's certain gases that are very powerful. This is the number here, this is the weight. So actually carbon dioxide is just considered a value of 1, but methane would be like 70 times more of an effect on the greenhouse gas. But from a total emissions, it's very small in relative. So carbon dioxide, it always is in the news, and that's the most popular one because it's the most prevalent. But the other ones are actually more powerful individually. But overall, carbon dioxide is by far the biggest contributor. And so what they do is try to normalize the output of their energy by carbon dioxide equivalents. So just a way to kind of roll up the different energy sources each company uses and then try to get into one common number. So it's a metric ton of CO2 equivalents. So then I can compare Rockwell's usage to another company of similar size or a different industry. We could say, all right, well, no one's going to be exactly the same. So it's hard to do a one-to-one comparison of it, but you can kind of get a gut feel that, all right, we're twice as big as this other company, but we're 5 times the amount of carbon. Okay, maybe something we're doing.
But isn't it relatively the size of the company?
Yeah.
Too? So, I mean,
Right.
it could be a relative.
So usually they'll maybe normalize it by number of employees or sales dollars or something like that. But the different industries are going to, obviously your heavy metal and those types of industries are going to be,
Well, you'd want to measure against a comparable type.
yeah, a competitor or something like that, yeah.
How do you get those numbers?
It's usually a roll-up of your utilities, so it's like your carbon will come out from your electricity bills, your natural gas and heating, any other gases. Sometimes it'll include, if you have a fleet of vehicles that are used at your company, they'll roll up, travel miles. Some get very detailed into rental car usage on business trips and airline flights for their employees. So it's not, there's guidelines on there, but how detailed each company gets varies quite a bit. Some are very detailed on every little thing, and they can track down to the individual offices on how much energy gets used. Other ones just have a utility bill like you get at home, and they report, here's our total. We don't have any breakdown below that. So like anything else in lean, it's like you get varying levels of detail of data that's available. So there's a general kind of a global, call it agreement, that the notion is that there has to be an 80% cut in this carbon emissions by 2050 to kind of stave off some kind of a global warming effect. That would be probably more of the catastrophic effect. So if the idea is to reduce those carbon emissions, then understanding how each company contributes to that, and it also includes cities and municipalities. They kind of roll up at different levels, so kind of different slices of the data by looking at areas and regions and try to roll up those numbers. So to answer your question, no, it's not usually required to report those out. It's it's a voluntary thing right now. But over the late years, there's been a continually increasing number of companies that are doing that. Rockwell started doing it, I believe, because their customers asked them to. So, and again, totally voluntary, but it just kind of shows that, hey, we're trying to be open, we're disclosing what we're doing, we're trying to do the right thing.
Is it part of ISO 14,000 or whatever?
Not to report the emissions, I don't think that's required, not for ISO, not for that. All the structure below that is in place though. If you have ISO 14001, the environmental management system, then you're going to be in good shape to be able to go out and address a lot of these issues. But I think just that very top level number of your carbon footprint, I don't think is required.
So will the carbon footprint of your suppliers roll up into your particular footprint?
No.
I mean, that's
It could,
possible,
eventually.
It could do that eventually.
When like the one where they do like the roll up of a single product line or item that you produce or a deliverable, those are supposed to include your supplier as well.
Okay.
So,
Right, so this table, the lifetime is how long that stays in the environment,
yeah.
and then the last one is the potential for impact.
Right, yep. Yeah, so this is the length in the environment, yep, and then this one is the impact to the greenhouse effect.
So in 2009, at the G8 summit, they reached this agreement to reduce it by 80%.
They agreed that there should be a they need to start to reduce it that much. Did they get
What it
the
would
countries to sign to that and agree to it? No.
And
They couldn't.
overall, what's happened since 2009? Has there been a reduction?
Well, when you get in a recession, you actually cut your emissions. You're not making as much stuff, so actually, some of that has gone down because of like economic reasons, but, and then some have continued their efforts. There's countries that are going full board on it. A couple of little countries are trying to go completely carbon-free, just to kind of send a message.
What are some of those?
Some of the island countries like the Maldives,
Oh,
because they're like 1 meter above sea level. So if greenhouse gas effect kicks in, sea levels rise, and basically they'll get flooded out, their whole island nation. So they see it as a very critical problem.
Yeah, the only problem is if you're the only one to do it and everybody else doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's the political battle.
Yeah.
China doesn't want to do it because they are trying to grow their economy and they're trying to become a world power. And now you want to, it feels like they're slowing down their progress. And it said, you guys polluted for years and years and years, you grew your economy to where you're at, now you're a world power, and now you want us to not get there either. And then, but then India and China are the largest populations, and they're growing the fastest and becoming more developed, and more of a middle class is growing, and so they're kind of going through a delayed growth from what the U.S. did. So they're like, well, we don't get to have the same kind of benefits you did. So there's lots of political reasons that a lot of companies are trying to fight it. So it's not a simple solution, but they did kind of agree that they should try to cut it, but how they're going to do that, that's a whole other story. So a lot of companies are doing that carbon footprint report as a way to just show that, hey, we're trying to do the right thing, we're understanding our usage, measure it, just understand where you're at today, and then now you can come up with a plan of how to reduce that. So a lot of companies have different reasons for trying to be more environmentally friendly. Financial reasons that they see it as maybe a growth opportunity from different products that they can sell. Or that they can, by reducing some of their waste and energy and hazards and any other costs that they have, they can cut those down. And, less material being used obviously is less, that's cutting into their profits. Or elimination of waste is going to cut into their profits, so they can get that reduced. That's going to make them more money. So that's pure financial reasons. Also, it helps with this long-term view of decision-making. So if you're looking across and trying to make decisions that are, years out in the future, it forces you to kind of have this more of a life cycle view of your product line and your services that you're providing. So, this might look good today, but in the future, is that going to become a problem for us? And so when you can look at the life cycle costs of things, you might make better decisions about how to spend your money. And we do need to invest more up front here because we're going to get that payback in the long run. And that's going to be a better financial outcome for our business, for our company. And then that kind of forces you to look strategically long term. So if we're looking at, let's say, energy and said, where do we want to be in 5 or 10 years from now, we have to start thinking about how to invest in that today. So it kind of forces you to look a little longer than some companies do today. There's also risks from a legal perspective. Regulatory compliance, being very proactive about getting ahead of issues or just reacting to existing issues. I feel like if they can stay, can work on some of these things, they can stay more compliant and not have to deal with potential fines or multiple audits and things like that. And then obviously there's risks that some companies have had and pretty severe PR damage to some companies who have had issues from an environmental perspective. That's going to impact their ability to make money or cut into their profits because they're actually dealing with issues. And then there's costs of having, a location that you have to maintain for years and years because of some of the hazards that are buried in the land, or so there's long-term payments that you're gonna have to be making on this, some decisions that are probably made years and years ago. From an employee perspective, the ones in green I highlighted are probably not the original intent of that, but they actually were kind of the side benefits of going green that they were starting to see and are reporting out. So, more motivated workforce, more engaged in what's going on, sense of pride in the company that says, hey, my company's doing all this good stuff. So it's kind of gives them more, better feel about the company, and they're probably more likely to stay, less turnover, that type of thing. And then acquiring new employees as well, as they look at some of the reports, look at some of the activity being done, they said, that's a company I'd like to work for. They look like they're trying to do the right thing. Someone I could be proud to work for. So the ability to bring in talent and keep that talent is some of the side benefits they're seeing as well. And then from a just customer and sales perspective, opening up of new markets. So as some of these issues come up in terms of how do we make this product operate with less energy? How does it can we put in some power down feature or some standby mode features? Can we use a less toxic material? Can we use a recyclable material? Those questions, if you can answer those and get ahead of your competition, you've opened up a new market that maybe has been unmet. Or you open up a new customer base that you didn't have before because of what you've offered in terms of that product. And then also as you get into these new areas, you're starting to have those discussions. If you're proactive in having those discussions with your customers, they're going to start to see you in a different light. That wow, they're bringing some solutions to the table. They understand what our needs are or our customer needs. So if you can get your foot in the door with them, it's more likely to lead to more business. Versus waiting for the customer to come tell you this is the requirement I want you to meet. So you're coming in ahead of it and trying to drive them to a direction. And then customer loyalty, especially when you have a commercial or a consumer product. There's a lot of loyalty to the customers that have really studied the companies themselves, understand what they're doing, their philosophy, and they're very loyal to the brand. It's because they feel that the company's trying to do the right thing and they want to stick with them and they want to make sure that they're successful. So, and then just product differentiation between you and your competitors, or innovating to say, how do we come up with a way to do this? How do we address this environmental problem with our product? And by coming up with that, you may be discovering new technology or inventing something new or experimenting and finding something that now is a patentable item or a trade secret that can help separate you or expand into other areas, new products and services, or sell the IP to other people. Also keeps your competitors at bay. If they're starting to do that stuff, you can at least stay up with them or stay competitive with them. Or your customer comes in and say, you're going to do this, and you say, okay, whatever you say. So some of that would be the customer, like in Rockwell's case, they had asked us to do the carbon footprint, but then they haven't asked for the last couple of years, but we continue to do that on our own. And then develop plans around that going forward. So the initial request was maybe more customer driven, but now there's more internal reasons why we're doing it. Or you get employees that say, this is something I think we should do, there's opportunity here, I'd really like to see this company go in that direction. So even though they're not really the original intent there's some side benefits that companies are starting to experience. Another example would be you've got natural lighting in a room. So you're investing in some windows, and maybe that cuts your energy cost because they're efficient windows and you're not losing heat out them. But the workers like having the natural light and they're more productive. And so you're getting productivity gains when you're just trying to get some energy savings. So stuff like that has been showing up somewhat to a surprise for some companies. So here's an example. You might have a product where you say, hey, we have a product, and we want to provide a service to our customers that we're gonna take back that product when they're done, so they don't take it to the landfill and throw it away. And so you look at it and say, hey, you know, it's a way for us to do the right thing and try to show that we're being concerned about the landfill and room we're taking up there and just throwing stuff away. We want to be more proactive. There may be some financial benefit of capturing that material and that product and turning it into some value for scrap metal, let's say, or being able to break out the different metals inside to reuse again, or break away the plastics or the cardboard packaging, or something to turn that into some money. So there might be some expected benefits you'll get out of this program. And you also know, there's some goodwill or some customer perceptions that we can improve upon by having this program. Shows we're trying to, again, do the right thing. So hopefully the community and the customer base will see that as a positive thing and feel better about your company. And then third would be like a landfill avoidance. So the other thing that's starting to come along is companies are responsible for their products, not just at the point of sale. So once they sell a product to a consumer or another company, they're not off the hook. So if that product starts showing up in the landfill, especially like in Europe, they're held to that. They're responsible for dealing with it. So they can't just say, well, someone, our customer threw it away, it's out of our hands. Nope, that's your product, and they can come back legally and say, you gotta go deal with it. So companies are now saying, all right, how do we handle this? If we have basically they own the whole life cycle now. They can't just say it's out of our hands once we sell it. So that piece of it can be a legal issue they're gonna have to deal with, and they don't want to have to. So this take-back program will hopefully try to reduce that risk. Now we're on the side benefits. Now what you've created is an interaction point with your customer. So now you've got a place where they can come, drop off, and now you have one-on-one interaction with your customer and talk about how did you like this product? Where did you get it? What are you using it for? And that's going to be a great innovation or idea generator for how does your product get used? Especially if it's something you're producing a lot of for like a consumer market where you don't have a lot of direct interaction with your customers. Oh, well, actually I use this for this, and this. Oh, really? That's odd. I never would have guessed that. I wonder if there's a market there for this type of thing that other people are using this for. So just the interaction there, you start to learn a lot about who your customers are and how they use your products. So that could lead to new products and new ideas. Also looking at just the interaction and the discussion with them on looking at what problems they had too. So, boy, everyone that comes in here, the handle's busted off. What's going on here? Okay, obviously there's some weakness in our design that it's getting a lot of use there. And so you can look at it from just a warranty perspective or a customer return issue and start to see some of those issues that, one, the backside of this panel is always banged up on all these customers. Why is that happening? Is there something we can do to minimize that? Or what are all the reasons why they're bringing it back? Is it always a certain component that's burning out or dying early, or just seeing those products give you a good feel of how it was used and how it stood up over time. Now you've got them there and say, hey, by the way, you're returning this old one. Have you considered our newest model? Or we're working on this newer one. Stay in touch because in the next couple of months we're going to be releasing this. So now you've got a little sales opportunity. And now the customer is more likely to be loyal to that company because they've had some interaction and they've kind of heard about some stuff. They've met somebody face to face. They put a name with, a face with a company. There's a higher chance of loyalty with them because of that interaction. Okay, so those probably weren't necessarily captured as part of the business case for putting together this take-back program. So there's a couple categories that we'll try to break out some of these issues. And this Technical Assistance Program, kind of one of the manufacturing, what's it, MEP? It's
Extension program.
yeah, manufacturing extension program. So the one that's close to Purdue has put together quite a few training classes around this type of topic. And they came up with a neat little waste acronym here for breaking out the different types of environmental issues. So water-related, air, solids or trash, toxic, which would be like your chemicals, hazards, and then energy. So kind of easy way to remember 5 different areas. So, you know, the first question would be, well, you know, we already have a lean program to take out waste. You know, why wouldn't this already be covered in that effort? So there's a couple different reasons. One is that the cost of doing business often gets cited as a reason why you don't really need to look into it. It's like, well, we have to run this equipment. It's the cost of doing business. You know, we have to, it generates this amount of waste. We throw it away. We just got to pay that bill. It's not really looked at as a, do we really need to have it that way? Is it really required or not? And so even at an individual level, you start getting down to individual products and services that you provide in a company that's, you know, it's not going to be $1 million for each product. It's going to be down in maybe hundreds of dollars. So say I'm going to go address it from my area on this one issue, you're not going to see, you know, millions of dollars of savings. But in an aggregate across the whole company, you will start to see thousands and thousands of dollars in potential savings. So it's usually looked at as, you know, small in the big scheme of things, or just, you know, hey, that's just what we have to deal with. It takes as much water, it takes as much energy. It's just part of the process. The other thing is that it's fairly difficult to isolate out a lot of those costs. So from a utility bill perspective, a lot of companies don't have the ability to track and meter up and break out that energy use or water use or even the landfill costs back to specific product lines or services. So it's hard to point to, here's where you're impacting us the most. Usually it gets blanketed across everybody. So they'll take the total bill and they'll slice it up by either number of employees or floor space or some other normalizer, and it just gets blanketed. So no matter what you do in your own area, you're going to pay the same amount, regardless of what you do personally, because it's not directly one-to-one tie with your actual usage. So there's not a lot of incentive that way either to say, well, if I cut my costs here, if I put in an energy efficient piece of equipment, well, the savings get blanketed across everybody. And so I spent $10,000 and got $100 in savings. Well, I'm not going to do that. So when you start looking at the department level, it's hard to make that business case individually. Someone's got to be kind of smart enough to see this is the best thing for the company overall. So if that's not clear, then it's hard for individual groups to make those decisions and feel like they're getting their money's worth. The improvement opportunities may be showing up outside of the normal working conditions. So when we talk about lean and you go to the Gemba, go to where the work's being done, and you realize, well, in this case, everybody's gone, there is no work being done, but we're still generating energy, or we're, you know, there's leaks, and so the water's still running, the air conditioning's still on, the equipment's still powered on, and you wouldn't see that unless you're going when the work's not being done. So it's a little bit different perspective because, you know, usually the normal mode isn't to go look when nobody's there. So by doing so, you're going to see some of those opportunities, but you have to kind of physically plan to do that. We actually have kind of rolled out an event format called Energy Go and See, and that's the plan as we go on like a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and do a walkthrough of the work area. And then come during shift changes and then also during normal operating time, just to see if there's opportunities. There's always usually something on that weekend to walk around that and see. There's also the impact to the environment and the human health issues, toxic chemicals in the air, is just gonna affect the larger community, and how does the company try to put a dollar to that? And how does it get rolled up into the business decisions? So some of those issues kind of get left, and we find out about them later, and then it's how do you react? And then, like I mentioned before, the side benefits may not be fully understood. So where you might have the business case there, but you don't really know how to quantify it, then you can't really sell the idea. But you would have gotten some of this additional benefit or improvements, but you just maybe didn't realize it was there. So it's not really part of that business case, and so it's harder to sell some of the improvements. Any questions about that?
I just find some of these things really kind of interesting from like, when you think from a lean standpoint, you're always focused on the cost of the business internal to your organization, or how you might be able to pass on some savings to the customers, but we don't look out long-term, those fringe things, and how they might impact our business.
Yep.
So,
So like the cities and the municipalities will have the ability to communicate with the companies can help with that. Hey, this is going to cause us to have to put in a whole new pump system to handle this amount of volume you're sending through the water, or we got to build a new power plant to be able to handle some of this. I'm sure those discussions are, you have some feedback, but even some of the less major type things like that may not be known.
but usually those conversations will happen in a reactionary way.
Sure.
The impact's too late. There's already a mess.
Yep, that's usually the case, right? It's always later you find out, oh, that would have been good to know 6 months ago.
Yeah, right.
Is that due to the lack of our systems thinking,
Yeah.
relating what we do to sustainability and separating profit from sustainability?
I think that life cycle view of things is where a lot of this gets lost. And that's general in all businesses, is we make decisions from a short-term department perspective that hurt us long-term because we don't have that view. So these get lumped into that even more so because a lot of these things won't show up right away.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, some of these things, we get so focused on production, what are we making, what are the parts, and what's the labor, material, and overhead that goes into that. But you mentioned the fact of going through your factory on the nights and weekends when nobody's there. Why are the lights on? Okay, beyond safety lights, you don't have to have it all lit up. Why are the exhaust fans on? Why is it being cooled on Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon when nothing's happening? I mean, you can cut your utility bills. We cut our utility bills almost 10% in the factory in Arkansas, just by shutting off the exhaust fans and turning off the heating and cooling on nights and weekends when they were down. Now, when you were running 3 shifts, you were up, and that was okay.
Yeah.
But the rest of the time, there's 2 days a week out of 7, that's nothing's happening in there sometimes.
Yeah.
Big bucks.
Another thing I wanted to add too is, in our society here, we're very focused from a business standpoint, typically 1 to 3 years, because that's how Wall Street likes us to look at things. The proactive companies, or quarterly, more importantly, quarterly. Proactive companies are saying 5 to 10 years, that's long-term for us. But if you think about some of these benefits, especially environmental, would you really see anything in 5 years? Like, I know Europe and Japan are taking more of a focus. They're looking at 25, 50 years. And you wouldn't see some of those benefits really, or you would look out 10, 15, 20, 50 years. Would that change how you interact or what actions you take if you take that longer term focus? Not on everything, but on certain things. So,
There's actually a term they call 7 generations. I think it's like an Indian proverb or something like that. But they were saying, make decisions that are 7 generations out in the
that's a
future.
biblical term
It's
too.
huge.
So, in the Bible, you'll find that in the Bible as well.
Yeah, so it's a very long-term perspective of, what's the best thing overall, long-term for everybody.
Yeah.
Have you looked at how we do metrics as far as hard savings versus soft savings? And the fact that a lot of managers make decisions based on, well, does it hit the bottom line or doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is that the
That's a
big
huge
driver?
piece of
for
this,
this?
yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of that stuff would probably show up in soft savings, unless you're getting paid, unless you're getting charged for above and beyond, like, energy use, or, you're gonna pay for hazardous waste disposal, you're gonna pay for landfill disposal, you're gonna pay for water usage, you're gonna pay for energy. Are those priced accordingly to the impact they have overall? I think that's a lot of the discussion that's been around. I think those are inexpensive or subsidized costs that aren't really seeing the full picture of the impact. So if you have a company that pollutes out some kind of chemical and there's people who go to the hospital because of that chemical, does that cost include the hospital bills and the emergency room visits for those people and the care they need, the medication they need going forward? So probably not. And so that full picture of what's the true cost of these problems is part of the problem. So if water is inexpensive or the permit to emit a chemical is inexpensive, then that's not really reflective of the true impact of it. So it incentivizes the company to not make changes to it. So if all the pricing was lined up correctly, if like the carbon, so that's why you've heard maybe some stuff about carbon taxes or, and I think the thought around that is that it would try to give a more accurate picture of the true impact of these emissions long-term, so the companies can incentivize companies to go in that direction, so it is a business case. Hey, our utility bills are gonna go double next year. A lot easier to sell some improvements because now the payback's cut in half what it used to be.
Well, one of your other comments was that the term I've heard used, they peanut butter stuff around, which is they just spread it around.
Yeah.
And so you gotta get next to your accounting department to get a handle on what the real costs are and get them properly allocated and get credit for the things that you do in your micro area as opposed to trying to let it be spread around to justify things. And you'd be surprised, you could turn a problem into a cost reduction.
Yeah.
And,
So you're gonna pay 80% of this bill now. You used to get 20%, but now it's allocated directly to you because we know you're the big user. Yeah.
exactly.
So you need data, and maybe some metering equipment, and someone's gotta kind of pay for that data, to get the data, to be able to allocate it out too, so some people are, why are we spending money just to get the data, so.
Well, it's
So frustrating.
counterintuitive for companies to want to develop products to last a long time.
I got that
The
too.
longer a product lasts, the less impact on it.
Right.
But
If it dies in 5 years, I can resell another
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
That's right. I've seen some more stuff going down the lines of leasing out products, so it's kind of like software is going, you don't buy it and it's yours forever, it's like you're leasing it from a company, and they maintain it, and so it is an incentive then for them to provide you that service, whether it's a vehicle or whatnot, but it's, they kind of still own that product all the way through, and so there is an incentive now that they're getting some money, but you're not owning it outright.
one of the things Deere got into, is they realized that they were developing a product to last longer and they still have to take advantage.
Take advantage of that, yeah. Versus you go, hey, I just need, the cheaper, the other products might be cheaper, and then it gets replaced more, so it incentivizes that company to make it that way. Because they know there's gonna be another sale next year.
Plain obsolescence.
So so trying to just understand the true cost of some of this waste streams is important as well. So to get a full picture of the business case, you need to see that, all right, if I have some problem with material that I end up throwing away or scrapping out, I just spent money in utilities to produce it the first time, that didn't go well, so that's a waste. I just spent labor money to produce something that was wrong. We usually capture the labor as some kind of a cost of non-conformance or cost of poor quality. But then do we count the amount of any money that we have to do to dispose of it or have to process or handle it? Especially if it's something that's a metal or a chemical that we can't just throw away. But even if it's just thrown away, there's a disposal cost that goes along with it too. So we probably kind of estimate this, and maybe if we have disposal costs, we might know that. But so when we do look at waste, we look at that full picture. How much labor was involved in taking that product, entering it into the system, labeling it somehow, walking it over somewhere, packaging it up, getting it ready for disposal. You know, is all that included in your waste impact? So just trying to get a handle around some of that cost, and heard it somewhere, you know, up to 20 times more than what a company thinks it actually is. So it may end up be, so if they estimate, you know, we think it's going to cost us $10 to deal with each scrapped item, maybe $200. So the lean tools, Six Sigma tools, just like any other thing, if you got a metric, you got numbers, you know, there's tools that can go help you reduce that or improve on those numbers. So 3M and there's a couple other companies that have done some case studies to show that, you know, when they've attacked it using Lean and Six Sigma approaches, they've had just the exact same benefits you get out of any other type of improvement, whether it's inventory or cycle time or quality. You're seeing those 50, 60, 70, 80% reductions. So the tools completely apply to these exact same type of issues. And IBM said that they have seen a 2-to-1 payback on the investment they made in some of these areas. So the EPA actually has come out with a couple different toolkits, and I'll link to those at the back. But one is like energy in the environment, or water toolkit, I think, lean water toolkit. There's a couple other ones, but they've kind of tried to give some methodology to companies on how they can start at the beginning and kind of walk through an approach using some Lean and Six Sigma approaches. So I found some of those things pretty beneficial, at least for a company just trying to get started without really knowing where to go. They try to provide that framework. So by employing Lean, you're going to naturally get benefits that are going to help the environment, because you're reducing waste, you're you know, saving floor space, you're, you know, all those same benefits are going to show up naturally. So just having a Lean program, you're naturally going to help the environment. But you can also go after and use the tools to attack those issues specifically. And just by doing so, you're going to help from all the Lean metrics as well. As you go after, why are we having to spend so much money with chemicals? Maybe it's because we're doing a lot of extra, we're not maintaining the equipment properly and it's starting to leak, or we're having to waste time cleaning up the spills or the drips and stuff like that, so it's taking away some of our efficiencies. So naturally doing Lean, you're going to get some environmental benefits, but there should also be some targeted approaches to go after environmental issues. And you'll get some side Lean benefits as well. And then the environmental, what you go after should align with your business needs, just like anything else. It shouldn't be, hey, we just went off and did this one effort because we thought it'd be really cool, but has nothing to do with our core business at all. So that's going to be viewed by your employees and maybe by the community a little differently than if you're saying, hey, this is what we do, this is what we influence, and we're going to do something directly into the products and services we provide that's going to benefit this, versus, you know, just throwing up a wind turbine. Hey, that's great, but you know, what's that have to do with your company? Why did you pick that over all the other things you could have done? Well, if you are a company that makes motors and you say, our motor is in that turbine, and we have now a product piece that fits into that effort, that's why we went after it, because it kind of fits our business. That's a lot stronger rationale behind what you're doing versus just, hey, we just arbitrarily picked something to go improve because we thought it would look good. So like one of the things in Rockwell, I'm trying to work with one of our engineering groups that we make glass for the cockpits. So they have a whole group that's experts on glass and how to keep the reflection down during, you know, the sun, so it's always visible at any different angle and at different conditions. So if we're looking at how do we apply that to solar panels, you know, can you use that same technology to increase efficiencies of solar panels? So that makes more sense than just going off looking into something random, just because it sounds like it might be good. So trying to tie it into the business itself and make it connect is important.
So far, the rate of technology change is almost against lean. I mean, the technology changes so fast, and we have to upgrade, we have to, it's just like the day you buy a computer, the day you receive it, it's outdated.
Yeah.
And it just seems like, wow, what a way.
Yeah, but on the other hand, we're moving things up to the cloud, which requires less power. Maybe, I don't,
Yeah.
does it? I don't know. I'm just blaring here, but when you talk about leasing, when we're looking into new CRM, customer relations software, a lot of that is just a payment on a monthly basis to use software on the web.
Yep.
Instead of purchasing a disk.
Right, yeah, installing it,
Yeah.
shipping it
So,
out,
yeah,
producing a
and-
CE or whatever, yeah.
and you don't have to maintain the basic software.
Yep.
The updates are included.
Well, that's a true savings and also a great benefit too, to companies like Microsoft. You go in and buy some of their software now, you can just go in and download it.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden now, they not only are not wasting the disk,
Yeah.
but they have a real savings there too. Where they're not going through the labor.
Plus they sell you the disc for $20.
Yeah.
So you charge it for.
Because you don't trust $30.
Right.
You have to rebuild it.
13? Yeah, I think I paid 19.
And plus, you don't have to drive to the office to use it anymore.
Yeah.
You can stay home and use it, so
Yeah, you
you're
can
not
stay
burning
home.
gas. You're not lighting a building, you're not heating and cooling a space, you're not doing a lot of things.
Yep.
You don't need the space.
That's right. You don't need build that new building and invest all that in.
So Brian, in the context of lean, what we think lean is, it's not just the elimination of waste, it's the flow and all those other tools. Are all of those tools applicable to sustainability?
I think so. I haven't
Or is it
found one
mostly
that's not
waste?
really not applicable yet. Still looking for
Yeah.
lots of good examples. I'm gonna go through here some in a second.
Oh, okay, so.
But, yeah, I think they're directly involved. I mean, some of them may get a little tweaking, but pretty much the concept's there. So first thing from a lean perspective is, what is value and non-value added in terms of some of these issues? Because someone will say, hey, we need this for the product, this is what the customer wants, I'm adding a value added piece here. They want that metal because it does a certain functionality. So if I'm using electricity to place parts on a board, that's value added. If I'm using water to clean the outside of a product, hopefully that's value added because the dirt and grime was not, it's just like, if it's because you have a messy area, work area, and you don't have, and that'd be more of a non-value added step.
Except in our case, we don't train people how to put the right amount of flux on, so we have to wash them.
Goop it off. So there would be non-value added. So there's a normal wash step that you go through, but if it has to go through 2 or 3 times because of the excess, now that's non-value added. So heat to keep the employees comfortable. Obviously, we don't want people all coming in with their coats and hats on just to save some energy. But we don't want to overheat either where it's heating the building and nobody's there. That would be on the non-value added side. And then any chemicals used to enhance the product functionality is good. If it's just there for, it's not directly a valued item for the customer, then it'd be non-value added. So you're lighting an area that you don't need, or you're doing rework on an area and you have to stay late, now you gotta turn your lights on to finish that work. Okay, that's non-value added use of energy. Or air conditioner, you don't keep it up and you neglect it, now you've thrown away that air conditioner and had to buy a new one, that's non-value added. Leave the test equipment on overnight, non-value added. Leave your projector on, or you don't have good controls on your chemicals and you spill it, or you don't have inventory control over it and you have to throw it away, scrap it out. That's non-value added use of energy or chemicals. So this is what we're going to go after. We know we're going to have some of that. We can look at the sources of where we're getting it from and try to find better environmental sources of that. But here's really what we want to start with, is what's the non-value added piece first. So they give out, this is also from the EPA, they give out different examples of different forms of waste and some of the environmental impacts of those. So inventory, obviously if you have inventory, you're going to have to heat and cool and light that area. and potentially transportation to get it back to where you want to actually use it and put it back away into the inventory. Or even build a new building just to house that inventory, so lots of waste coming there, overproduction, using up more materials that I may or may not end up using, so where does that end up going, or am I have to discount my products to get it sold, and now I've lost an opportunity with some customers. Emissions of moving stuff around, if I gotta ship it somewhere, or drive it somewhere off-site, or at a different location, or use a forklift to get it somewhere, I'm using up energy that maybe I don't need to. Any defects I create are gonna be, I gotta redo that process again, so whatever energy and chemicals I use is gotta be redone again. And then any waiting around, obviously waiting can lead to, it's kind of like there's risk there that it could go bad, or something could corrode, or it could get damaged just sitting there. So the more time it's sitting there, there's potential risks there involved. So here's a good case study that was at ASQ that had a company that was looking at, how do we reduce our impact, and they looked at a bunch of different categories, but when they broke it out, one of the interesting things in the study was got a whole idea around life cycle or systems view, or the sub-optimization problems you can run into. So they were trying to do the right thing and looking at how do we cut our energy costs. And so one thing they looked at was, well, we clean these parts with a really hot temperature. What if we dial down the temperature so it wasn't as hot, and therefore we could save some electricity cost that was heating the water. Okay, that's a great idea. But when they looked at it, they realized, well, when we don't get the temperature hot enough, we end up adding 2 more cleaning steps with chemicals and more water, 2 steps down, because it didn't quite do the job. So by not looking at it in a whole perspective, they could have gone down a path and actually created more waste and more time and more processing, trying to save energy. So you have to have that system view to be able to say, all right, what's the best thing overall for this whole process? And actually they end up turning up the heat on that process and increasing the energy cost because they were going to save it on the back end of avoidance on those extra process steps. So it actually went the other direction, but they actually did get savings off that by doing something counterintuitive, because they were getting out of the sub-optimization piece that says, what's my energy use and what can I do to save money in my area that actually is going to make things worse somewhere else. So I thought that was a good piece study there. But they also kind of broke out where their different wastes were and what they did. So here's the thought process as you go through is, the first thing you want to think about is, can I actually refuse to use that energy or material or chemical at all, or water use, all those 5 wastes, can I refuse that period? Do I even need to do that at all? And then if I have to use it, then can I reduce down the amount that I need? So, I guess the water bottle is a good example. So first is I don't even buy the water bottle in the first place. Secondly, it would be, all right, do I need the large bottle, or can I get away with a smaller bottle? Or I take an old bottle that I had and reuse that one. That would be like the reuse one. And then if I get done with it and I don't throw it away, but maybe I recycle it, so I take it somewhere and they reprocess it back into some other plastic. There's also some heat, energy stored up into that bottle that could be burnt and extracted out to produce energy or the byproduct. So I could burn the item and get the heat or the energy back out of that, power something, or do something with that. And then finally, the last decision is that I actually just throw it away. So the idea is that a lot of times we might say, well, we're doing a good recycling program, but we've kind of skipped through 3 prior steps there that we should be evaluating. And then maybe we jump straight to dispose, and maybe there's a recover step that we could go in there, or upcycle, or kind of change the intent of that. So before I just recycle it, maybe I'm going to use it for a different purpose. So that's kind of the hierarchy of the thought process to go through. And we kind of jump to recycling and say, all right, we're doing some really good stuff, but there's a couple steps ahead of that we got to think about. So okay, here's some tools. So on your VSM, one thing we could do is start to, if we can get that data, is to try to add that into our maps. So here's under water, we can add in, water usage is one of our items, our metrics for our data box. And so you can even calculate out the total usage if you want. The other one kind of shows a consumption line. That's kind of addition to the timeline. It shows, okay, how much of the material went in, how much came out. All right, it looks like we're losing 40 pounds somewhere. Is there a way we can reduce that down so we can make that 120 and maybe 110? So we're only losing 10 pounds over that. How can we get more efficient with the use of those materials or chemicals? So tracking it as a separate kind of in and out from that process. And then you could do an overall efficiency that says, hey, we start with 120 and we only get 10 pounds worth of material out of it. All right, there's a lot of waste there. How can we cut that down, save some money? This is, I kind of mentioned this go and see effort. We've probably done, say, 8 or 10 different events around our Rockwell campuses. And that's the idea, is you go through and you make some observations, initial observations that say, I was in here the other night and I noticed all these lights are on, this might be a good area to work on. Then you're putting together kind of business case, getting a team together of people who work in that area, get ready for the event, look at some past information, maybe do some data collection if you can, meter up a couple key, like big energy user equipment, so you can kind of get an idea how much it costs to run that equipment. Kick off the event, do a training with the team, then you actually conduct the different events, which would be like a weekend visit, a startup period in the morning, like on a Monday morning usually, maybe a shift change or a break time. See do people shut down stuff when they go to break, or they leave things up and running. And then at the end of the shift, when they leave, what do? Do they shut everything down? Is it sporadic? So just kind of observations at that point. Come up with opportunities for improvement, prioritize those. Usually the big items go to the facilities group, who's kind of working on capital projects for energy. And then the more behavioral type of actions should be the team can take on. We need to shut down this. And setting some expectations for the group. At the end of the day, last person out shuts the light off. Everyone will shut off their monitors. Everyone will shut off their tools when they leave. Setting some expectations and then trying to follow up and review that. So that's that roles and responsibilities. What's the expectation for people? A lot of times that's not very clear. I didn't know I was supposed to turn that off. Right? I thought I was supposed to leave that on. And then, communicate that success out, and some of those savings at a small level, harder to capture, but at least you're kind of driving that right behavior. And it serves a second purpose of getting engagement from the people. So, yeah, you made some observations during the event, but next week when they notice something, hey, there's a leak over there, I wonder who I should call. I'll call that maintenance person that was in our event. So you start, it's all about kind of seeing the waste. And in this case, sometimes it's not as obvious, but once they start looking for it, it becomes a little bit more obvious. What's that air leak? Here's something somewhere. It's something I've just droned out over the years. It's always been there, but now I can hear it. It kind of becomes visible or audible in that case. Dumpster dives, my favorite. Actually laying out all the trash and going through it and categorizing it like you would do anything else. If you have a scrap problem or defect problem, you do the exact same thing. You lay out all your items and you start categorizing. What is this one? What's this one? What does my Pareto or my pie chart look like when I'm done? And then you start looking at the big hitters and say, what can we do with this waste before? And this is all stuff that was planned to go into the landfill. So what can we do to cut into some of these areas? What are these items made up of? Where do they come from in the process? What do we use them for? Is there other options we can do to avoid that? You guys went, you guys are at you guys have a zero landfill facility now?
Yeah,
Okay.
so,
How did you guys get there, I guess?
that's a good question.
Just right away, you just turn the switch and
Yeah.
next day you're
Yeah,
landfill free?
of our waste is recycled and about 50% is sent to an incinerator.
Incinerator, so you can recovery piece or burn though, right?
Yeah, and so obviously dumpster diving is something that took place for a while. I actually am happy I didn't have to participate in that since we're a meat company, but yeah, all that, you know, thinking went into it. I think I wasn't involved in a lot of the detailed work, but basically following our waste streams and figuring out where it's going and where it's coming from, and then, you know, figuring out how to get ahead of it and separate it, you know, towards the front of the process so that you're not pulling from one pile and trying to do that later. So thinking more in terms of, I don't know if this is a good comparison, but prevention versus inspection, right? Getting ahead of it and separating in the beginning, but yeah, it's been an interesting change. My understanding is we've kind of taken that step as kind of a competitive advantage. You know, I don't know what the statistics are, but I believe we're touting ourselves as being one of the first food companies to ever do that. And that requires, you know, 99% of your waste being accounted for and not going to landfill. So, just anecdotally, I hear people talk about how it costs us more money to do it this way, right? So there's work going into separation, there's work going into, you know, our waste is being transported to different places now instead of a local landfill. So it's interesting.
That's a perfect example of that, you know, where's the money flow, right? So, the methane is a gas that comes out of landfills with, especially with food products, which is very toxic. So no one pays for that, right? So the charge to dump food into the landfill is cheap, but the impact of that can be very costly from a greenhouse gas effect. So yeah, no one's really paying for that today. So it is cheaper for companies to do that, or even individuals to put their food in with their trash. So, but the impact of that is large. So it doesn't flow through. So companies have to kind of go out there and say, I know this is more expensive for us because we're kind of covering that extra cost, or you know, paying for the landfill. Like it would get allocated out to probably your property taxes, I guess, if they had to expand the landfill to cover the additional trash going in there. So. We're all kind of paying for it a little bit anyways, so they save money, they take it and avoid charging everybody else in the community for it. They're not gonna even know that happens, so.
Right.
Companies have to kind of know that this is the right thing to do, even if the business case isn't quite there, so.
Right.
So we did one at Kinnick Stadium, that was pretty fun. Can you imagine?
I've got a question, Brian.
Yeah.
These 8 to 10 events or whatever you're referring to, how is that initiated? You're obviously part of a lean group.
Yeah.
Is that you going and finding those opportunities? Is that people coming to you? Because obviously, to do some of this stuff, you need buy-in from certain people and certain levels of management.
Our
How does that
management
work?
did, we put together like a team called the Global Sustainability Team, which is a cross-functional group. And then we, to answer our carbon footprint report, we had to come up with a goal. That was the next step. So once we kind of got our leadership to agree to what that goal would be, I think it's 15% by 2014, we're going to cut our carbon. So once we kind of agreed to that and said, well, let's get a team together and this is our plan to go attack that. So our facilities took it on to help because they could see the cost savings on the money for electric bill or gas bill. So they wanted to support that. And environmental said we've got other, you know, issues with water and employee behavior stuff that we'd like to try to address that we can help with. So kind of those two departments were key drivers of that. And then we said, well, how do we go after this from the employee level? And the EPA had this treasure hunt, they called it. That was their term. So we kind of took the concepts there. We benchmarked a couple companies and what they do, like GE and I think Baxter Healthcare and a couple others, and they kind of had a similar program where they just kind of went around and did observations. And then you just walk through and you see that there's opportunities all over the place. So it's a combination of that. That was kind of where we got the support from.
Okay.
All right, so we've got to throw some statistics in there. So one problem at the Rockwell facility is they had 0 electric data below the level of the building. So one of the projects I wanted to start with was C Avenue Complex, which is the whole block between Collins and Blair Ferry. 2.5 million square feet or something like that. And basically all they get is the same bill you're getting as electric bill. And it said, good luck, go find the waste, you know. So try to figure out some different ways. We did have 5-minute data, but it was still across for the whole building. So we could see every 5 minutes how much usage it was, but where that was coming from was completely, it could have been anywhere in that building. So one thing we tried to do is figure out what are the key drivers of our usage. So looking at the monthly bill, we tried to figure out what factors are most important. And so we tried to line up each bill with some measure of number of employees in the building, our output from a production standpoint, the average outside temperature, and there's a couple other factors that went into that, but we got it whittled down to these 3 key factors and got a decent, R squared. We wanted, you're trying to get that to almost 100%. So we can get pretty good with just 3 or 4 factors. We could get pretty close to predicting what our energy usage is going to be. So now we can go look at these and say, well, now we can just build a dome over the complex and prevent high temperature from affecting the, So we're not going to control the temperature. However, what does temperature tell us that we could do something about? How do you interpret high temperature being a driver of our usage? What can we do to impact that? We're not going to
Use
can't
more
stop
reflective if it's a case of high temperature causing more air
the
conditioning
outside
hours.
temperature, so we spend more energy in the summer and less in the winter. So we can't control the temperature, but what can we control that is correlated with the temperature
Heat
outside?
transfer coming into your
Barrier, yeah.
facility.
And the indoor temperature.
You insulate your building better.
There you go. So you
Gardens on the-
minimize the impact of the temperature
Use more
fluctuations.
reflective roof materials too, because that's one of the
Yeah.
big things that's, I know a green factor too, is how dark is your shingle or how dark is your roofing. Has a huge impact on your
Oh, yeah.
heating dollars, or cooling dollars in the summertime.
So for this one, they said, well, what happens when the temperature goes up? Oh, the heating and cooling system kicks in. The vents, the fans start up. That's stuff we can control. Are we as efficient as we can be with that equipment? How are we using the equipment? Is it running 24/7? It was running 24/7. So we have a setback program now. It's been, I think, $300K in savings from just shutting off after like 7 o'clock. We did some surveys. We figured out nobody's, there's a few people that are here. So they put in like little buttons that would you get 2 hours of heat and cooling. It goes back to the normal settings for 2 hours. And if you're there longer than that, you got to go hit the button again. But it's a way to deal with people coming in at random hours. Because that was the feedback. Like, well, we come in on the weekends. We come in on odd times. I want to come in at night. I don't want to come into a heated building that's super hot and uncomfortable.
So how would the electricity using winter?
Kilowatt hours? Kilowatt hours, total energy.
So off peak time, what would that, you still use?
Yeah, we're still using energy. It's cheaper than using it during the day, but it still is being used. So that's where the savings was. Okay, so we can look at this stuff. We can look at employees and say, we don't want to reduce the number of employees. But we can look at their behaviors and see what are we teaching them, what are we training them, what are they doing. Output, we don't want to reduce output, but we can look at what are the key drivers of that equipment. What are the equipment that we use to make those products, and are they efficient and being used properly? So using some different data to try to get at the same problem and not having all the detailed metering that I would love to have there. So some other things like FMEAs, you can throw in some catastrophic, different levels of severity based on environmental impacts to try to capture some of that. I'm going to go through these kind of quick, sorry. There's an event checklist, so if you don't have an ES&H person available in your events, you you can have this checklist available to kind of talk through different things to consider before you make any change to your processes. You know, are you gonna move the equipment? Well, it might be permitted. Are you gonna, you know, we have certain, all these things to consider, and then maybe have that checklist to go through first before you, and then bring in that person just for that time period, maybe as an expert on call, if they can't be there the whole time. So they have a checklist available, and you guys can have this again. So some key things is that try to make the environment part of that customer or stakeholders in your process evaluations. So give them some kind of a voice in terms of what's the impact going to be to the community or the environment or the natural resources in the area, so that we have that as part of the considerations. You're actually going to improve the environment with just doing normal lean improvements, but we also want to try to capture some of those benefits and try to tell that story. And again, looking at a lot of these areas where there's non-value-added tasks, reducing space, reducing raw materials, cutting down the amount of packaging, that type of stuff. You can add the environmental usage and the costs to your data boxes. If you have that data available, sometimes it's difficult. But usually there's people who can go in and do at least a sample of the data or some temporary metering. That's what we did for that energy project. Add some definitions around 7 forms of waste, include some of those environmental impacts into those definitions. Tie back the issues to core business needs. So this is going to be either cost savings, or it's going to reduce risk or legal issues with us, or it's going to help our reputation. Go after specific environmental metrics. So go after project run energy reduction, or around water reduction, or chemical hazardous material disposal costs, and focus lean efforts around that, and use it pretty much the same kind of tools for that. Incorporate that event checklist that has for things to consider in your event, and then take the slide on the next couple slides here and share that with people in your company. And then I've just got some stuff on this Cirrus group through Iowa State has a Green 101 workshop, and then a dumpster dive simulation that they go through. They have just a big, it's all, it's not messy stuff, but they just have a way, they kind of walk you through how to go through that process. It's not complicated, so you can just try it yourself. Start with your house. And then this Purdue group is where I got some training as well. And then a couple different books that I've found. I've read most of them actually, a couple of them I haven't yet. But they're pretty good. They kind of make kind of the same points that I'm making here. And some other links might be of interest. So hopefully something will pique your interest and dig into it. Let me know if there's other questions. I had a couple other slides in here about some other tools. So those are in there as well. But, so, any other questions? No? Okay.
Great job, thanks, John.
Thank you.
Learn more about sustainability in an hour and a half than what I do. That's great.
Okay.